This is, or actually arbor. This is the minute arbor, and this is what's called the escape wheel. Now, in a restoration, what we do is go in and do some work on the ends of these. There was some damage. If the damage doesn't cause the clock to malfunction, then you leave it, because it's all historical marks. And what had happened was, the way you set this, Seth Thomas came up with a little bit better setup later on, which was a half shaft on here with a crank. So you could go in here with the actual clock key and you could crank it, and it would advance the time. Well, on this, they didn't have that yet. So what they did, you would take and loosen this nut, and you'd slide this, which is called the verge, you slide it away from the escape wheel. Well, if you don't have a good hold on the escape wheel when you're doing that, this escape wheel will just take off flying. And it obviously did, and cut into the side of the pallets on the verge, and just did a little damage. I went back and I straightened a few of the places, but we've run it now for quite a while, and it doesn't show any signs of causing any trouble at all. There's still plenty of good meat left on the ends of those. So what we had to do was take everything out, all the wheels, all the pinions and the arbors, everything was completely disassembled on this. And we did a very mild cleaning. It took a lot of work to try. What you have to do is get all this 100-year-old grease and crud off of here without taking any of the paint. So it's a very slow, tedious process. But I think it came out real good, and to think that this is paint from 1882 means a lot, that it's still in this condition, and I think it turned out really well. You can tell when I reset this thing, I use my right hand to loosen this nut and slide it back, and I have to have my left hand on the escape wheel, and I hold it right here. So that kind of explains why originally I wondered in certain places why the paint was missing, and it does look like somebody was holding this just the way I do, and it wore the paint off right there. There's other places it's also obvious where there's just places where the oil will lay on the frame, and you can see these places that the paint isn't quite as intact as, say, something in areas that stay dry.
Yeah.
This is what is called the rating nut, and this is where you adjust the height of the pendulum to come up with the proper speed of the clock. And this was gone, and the only thing that was holding all this weight from falling was there's these two screws right here. Screw in and hold this piece in, and it was actually keeping the pendulum from falling. These pieces were gone. This is what I call the suspension spring blocks. And what that does is these blocks, when you pinch them in on that pendulum spring, that's where the pivot point is. And that's what determines the speed you have from that pivot point on these blocks down to the bottom of the pendulum determines the overall height. That determines the speed. This is a 1 second pendulum. You could some of these clocks had 1.5 second pendulums on them, which meant the bob of the pendulum would be down through the floor. There would actually be a hole cut in the floor, a triangular hole, so that the pendulum rod would swing down through the floor. This is a 1 second. This cup. So what had happened when I got there, these were gone, and they had pinched this top arbor in, and the spring there. So there was absolutely no adjustment in the height. So what they were doing was raising and lowering this cup trying to get the speed correct, and you can see all the damage that was done on the pendulum rod. It must have been driving the poor guy crazy that was trying to set this thing, because there is just places all over that where it set it, and you can put little BBs or whatever in that cup. That's why it was designed that way, to try to help regulate this thing. Now, the crutch is this piece right behind here, and what it does, it hooks on to the arbor that the verge is on, and it delivers the beat or the pulse to the pendulum, and that's what keeps the clock going. You have the escape wheel that is, when it pushes off the side of these pallets, it gives a little impulse, and it is what, in other words, pushes the pendulum to keep it running. What I did, I had to go in, because none of this was, I don't know at what point some of this got changed out, but when it must have been when they took out these blocks, they maybe had to make a new suspension spring, and they didn't make it long enough. So what I did, I made all this, and then I found a set of original suspension spring blocks off of number 16, but on some of the number 16s, this part right here was longer, and so these blocks were taller. Well, you can see that distance in between that block and this piece right here is all the adjustment you have on speed. So to get as much space as I could in between there, what I had to do is machine these down, cut them down to where they work fine, and but they just aren't the size of what the originals were. These pieces here are just they're a yoke that just protects, if anything would happen and the suspension spring would break, the pendulum and bob won't get away from you. They'll just rest on it.